It's funny because Hugo kind of birthed out of something that I thought about a couple of years ago. Like, Hugo has been spinning in my head, I would say probably the last 2 to 3 years. Not like the entire story of Hugo the Bloodless, just like his character. And I wanted to do something magical. Like, I wanted to create something that was just memorable. Since I was a kid, I've always loved fantasy. Like, I've consumed it all the time. My girlfriend loves fantasy. She loves Harry Potter. She loves Lord of the Rings, tarot and crystals, just like kind of magical stuff. And it's always been intriguing to me, like those worlds that people create, those magic systems, languages, whatever it may be. And so even since I was like a teenager, I was like, I want to create something like that. I want to create a world that's cool and that's unique and that's fun to be in. I've read a lot of fantasy books in my time. Like, that makes me sound very old. I'm only 24 years old, but because as a kid, I loved that genre. Recently, I've been reading a couple fantasy books. I read Earthsea, which it's like 6 books, I believe. I've only read the first 3. They're not very long. They're only like a couple hundred pages, and they're pretty good. They're like about dragons and stuff like that, but they're cliche. They rely on the casual dragon trope. And I read this series called The Ranger's Apprentice in middle school and early high school, and it's like 14 books now. That's ridiculous. Like, it's like, I don't even know if it's like, it's technically fantasy. It's like on the binge of it. It's like kind of like an alternate Viking-esque story. Kind of. It's weird. But I read like the first like 4 books, and then I like just kind of stopped reading it. I don't know why. But I revisited it like a year ago. And I could not even get past the first 3 chapters in the first book because of how bad it was. And it's shitty for other authors to bash other authors, but you're asking me on the chat right now, like what I think about other fantasy authors and stuff like that. It was like a 7th grader's first draft of his first fantasy book. Like, it was just so cliche, and the writing was bad. It was like, it's about this guy named Will, and he goes to like this school, but you don't ever get to know what they like teach there, because it's only in there for like the first like 7 chapters, and then he just goes off, and it's just weird. Like, like the world is just strange. It's not very well sculpted. Basically, there's not really a history to it. It's just kind of there for the sake of being fantasy. That there is a lot of fantasy writers, not like the big names like Brandon Sanderson or like Tolkien and stuff, that they're not good. Like, they rely on tropes. They rely on just kind of crappy conflicts that don't really get resolved. They leave a lot of open loopholes and unanswered questions. And it's just, I wanted to make something that would answer all the questions. I wanted to make a world that meant something, not just to me, but to people. Because as a writer, when you're wanting to tell a story, you have to think about how it's going to affect someone emotionally. You have to think how someone's going to take that story. And so, at the end of the day, it's your book. You can write whatever you want to write. You can take and weave the story however you want. But you do have to take into consideration who's going to be reading this. Who's going to be, reading about this world, this character, and the things that occur, the plot, basically. And so with Hugo, it's been a challenge because I've always wanted to make a fantasy book. I've always wanted to write it. And I wrote this like really cringy fantasy book when I was like 17, and it was called Immortals. And I wanted it to be a 5 to 6 book series, but it's like modern, but on fantasy elements. It's weird, but I read the first one, and I still have it on my computer, and oh my God, it was cringy. And I was just like shriveling into myself of how bad my writing was in high school. I came to realize, I'm like, if I want to take this seriously, if I want to be a writer, I have to hone in my skills. And so when I was still in high school, when I was a senior, which is also around the time when I met Ashley for the first time online. I had a great creative writing teacher named Drew, and we would go and sit for months and months and just hone in my writing, and I would write short stories and poems, novellas, and just constantly try to, I would read articles, I'd watch documentaries on famous authors, and just be like, what makes their books good? I want to do that. I want to make my books good. And over the years, I just started developing my English skills and grammar and just what makes a good tale. And then I took inspiration, I loved history, I loved fantasy, I loved horror, and I wanted to write all these things. My inspiration for Hugo the Bloodless was kind of just farted into thin air. Because I wanted to make a world where there was every damn thing. I wanted to have cool sounding unique names for countries. I wanted to have a currency system that made sense. I wanted to have a magic system that made sense. I wanted to have interesting, memorable characters that people would fall in love with. I wanted to have its own language, its own backstory and history and religion, everything. I wanted to have all these environments like jungle and forest, snow, desert, enchanted forests, swamps, farm fields, mountains, everything that I could possibly think of, I wanted to have in this book. Originally, I wanted to make it 3 really long books. I wanted it to be a trilogy, but my girlfriend came to me and said, this could be good if it's a long book. This could be good if it's just one long epic tale. And so that's what prompted me to be like, I'm going to write the longest fantasy fiction book ever. I'm going to surpass all these motherfuckers, and I'm going to write this epic armada. Because I started thinking of Hugo a couple years ago. I want a character that's witty. He's intelligent, like genius. I want him to be musically invocated. I want him to be like a bard or something. I want him to tell his life story. Because I feel like stories where there's the character telling his life story is interesting. It's cool because you get to see this character grow. It's a great story of adolescence and growth. And it makes a reader connect emotionally more with the character. You guys know me. I like drawn out stories. I like long, slow burns. And Hugo the Bloodless is very much like that. Most of my books are slow burns because I want to give the reader time to know these characters, to know the story, to know what's going to happen. And with fantasy, it's hard because it's not like The Catman the Naturalist where it was hard to write that from an emotional standpoint because of how sad it was, but it happened in real life. So I knew where the plot was going. It was just a matter of writing it creatively and doing Fitzroy justice in the way he deserves. But with fantasy, you have to create everything up here. You have to make sure it all makes sense. You can't leave loopholes. You can't leave clues that are not solved. It's crazy. And I just wanted, I started just kind of pulling all these inspirations from mythologies and history and religion and all this stuff, and making up my own religion, like Tuluan and Canis, basically God and the devil, basically. And I wanted to have this character that was a badass, but not so much a badass that it was unrealistic. I still wanted him to have to learn things, go to school, get educated. I didn't want the silver spoon to fall into his lap and be like, oh my God, I'm a wizard because I have this magic wand like in Harry Potter and I'm the chosen one. That's so stupid. Come on. I wanted him to earn his keep. I wanted him to struggle with money for a while because everyone struggles with money. Everyone goes through those financial, hardships. And I wanted him to experience real life things. Falling for that first girl when you were a young man and the girl is not so good to you, but you keep trying because you're head over heels for her because you think she's so beautiful and she's the first girl you've laid eyes on. You're having all these strange feelings and things are going crazy. Get more mature. I want him to make mistakes, but learn from those mistakes. Because a lot of the tropes in fantasy is characters don't learn from those mistakes. My inspiration for this world, for Tierment, and, you know, I wanted to have a foundation type of history and religion. I wanted it to make sense. I wanted it to be its own world. I wanted it to feel alive. I wanted it to feel breathing, like this world could have existed in an alternate 1260 medieval Europe. And, you know, I wanted the writing to be amazing. I wanted it to be just depicting nature and just like a ton of mystery and a ton of riddles and a ton of cool items and weapons and like magic, and the world is full of cool things. Like I wanted to include everything, you know, creatures, and it's just, it was hard to come up with it because I sat down and I was like, I have to figure this out because I want to do this. Sorry, I'm just like rambling. Okay, Sally, you were asking, how do I come up with stories? If you want to write all these books, which is spanning over 100, how do you come up with them? Like what I do is like I sit down, I have on my computer like a big list of all these books I want to write. I don't actually come up with the title right away because most authors don't know the title of their book. I come up with that most of the time later, or if I've written it for a while and then I'm like, okay, I kind of come up with a title for this now. But I sit down and I'm like, I figure out these main points. What do I want the plot to be? What do I want the theme to be? What do I want the character to be, male or female? When do I want it to be set and where? Or if it's in a made-up world, what do I want conflict to be? Interweaving all of these things like character backstory, thicker plot, magic, currency, different characters, sayings, mannerisms, gestures of this world. You know, because you know, conflict is a big thing in books. You have to have conflict, but it's not the sole purpose of a book. You know, the responsibility of a writer is like, you know, my mom used to read me this children's book when I was a kid called A Honey Badger, and it was about this honey badger in Africa that would go around meeting all these different savanna animals and trying to get his honey back. And it was a very good, very simple children's book, but I loved it. And my mom read it to me like for like a year, like almost every night before I would go to bed. And it was just a good memory. But so many authors try to just focus conflict so much. And I'm like, you have to have time with friends. You have to have time to build relationships in your story. You have to have time to stay in a place. Like you can't have a ton of traveling so sudden because it's too jarring. I like to spend time in like Amir, and I want to spend time in Modeg, and I want to spend time in the Seld. I spent 25 chapters in Adamir. Like you have to have time to be there, or it just won't be as impactful. People ask me about Tolkien. I've seen the movies, but I've never read any of his books. I know it's bad, I need to, but there was one thing that I did notice. I've read some things on him, because he was essentially the birther of fantasy. He's the one that shot the genre into the world. He's the one that started fantasy. And his books are great. His worlds are cool. But I've noticed there's not a single goddamn woman in The Hobbit. Bilbo's mother, I think, is briefly mentioned in The Lord of the Rings, like in passing. But they're all just like, I'm so sick of seeing the cliche woman trope is where, in movies or books, they're just there for a romantic or sexual piece. That's it. I like having independent, intelligent, powerful women figures in my story because it's more interesting. Like it's awesome because like not every book has to be fucking male bravado. Like, I mean, goddamn. And it's just, you know, it's crazy that there's so many authors that do that to women, and it's just sickening because it's just, they paint them as just, that's what they're only for, and, you know, that's it. They're there for the male to be romantic with, And like in the order, I wanted powerful women figures and Hugo the Bloodless. Dinah was different because I wanted to show the first kind of like you fall in love with someone, but it kind of doesn't pan out, because that's a regular thing that happens in a young man or a young woman's life. But he met Forlorn, and that's his one and only now. And so it's just, I don't know, I just wanted something good. And I'm not shitting on Tolkien. He was a great writer during his time in the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, and 50s. But I just noticed that there was a lot of sexism, racism. And it's just, goddamn. Oh, someone said, Copy Addy said Tolkien is one of the greatest fantasy writers of the 20th century. Yes, that's true. But yes, I do agree with you. Women were not very prevalent. They were kind of just princesses and damsels in distress. Basically, yeah. Very cliche. But I wanted to do something different with Hugo the Bloodless. I didn't want to rely on tropes. That's why there's no dragons in it. They may find a dragon skeleton, but they're extinct. I wanted it to be different. And I took inspiration for all these different things, like by languages like Norse, and Greek and Latin, and kind of just made up words. And it's just great. Because it just sounds awesome and amazing. And I wanted crazy characters like the masters at the university with Loden and Rivelin and Mandrake and the Chancellor. And I wanted the school to feel like he's teaching Hugo something. I wanted Bass to be mischievous and sly and curious and kind of a little bad. You don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy really yet, because Hugo technically is a neutral. He's a good guy at his core, but he will do bad things if it needs to happen. If it serves the story. So I didn't want to just go for this, I'm this amazing hero, whatever. And I wanted to go for a little like, he tells lies about himself. Some of them, a lot of them are true, but some of them aren't. He exaggerates. And so that's what's fun about writing this book, is I get to explore myths in this world. Thierry, hi Thierry, how are you? How did you come up with sympathy? I actually got inspiration for sympathy from my girlfriend. Without her knowing. My girlfriend is big into, like, she's a witch, basically. She's big into healing crystals. She's big into tarot. She doesn't do tarot as much anymore, but she still loves it. You know, she's big into kind of like energy stuff and like magic stuff. No. Hey, she may be into like some real ritualistic stuff, but hey, call her out. Don't fuck with me, man. She's not a blood witch. There's no blood magic involved. Energy is in everything. It is in nature. It's in ourselves as human beings. It's in the sky. It's in the universe. It's in the world. And so I was, looking at all these things, and I'm like, no one's ever fucking done an energy-based magic. Like an energy manipulation system. So I was like, let's fucking do it. Let's do it. And I like some cliche magic. Like I like herbal magic, I like dark blood magic, I like grimdark stuff. So I did want to include some of that stuff. Like Sigiltree is a very Nordic, it's based on runes. I love runic shit. And so I just wanted to interweave all these different magics that would make sense. Same thing with currency. I sat down and made out a math chart on my computer of like how much things cost in this world and how it like amounts to purchases and stuff. And I wanted everything to make sense. That's why I wanted to include so many stories that characters tell each other. I wanted to include riddles and mysteries and have Easter eggs and foreshadowing between the lines that would lead to a later plot in the book, because it's just, it's fun to do that, and it just makes the reader wonder. It is overwhelming to write this because I want it to be perfect. In my mind, I want it to be perfect because I don't want to half-ass it, and it is hard to write. It is, because it's so long and there's so much story I have left to tell, and I want to do it as best as I can. I want all the clues to be answered. I want the ending to be a punch. I want someone to sit down and read this long book and then they just finish it and they're just like, holy shit, that was awesome. And I just want it to be amazing in its own way and include every little nook that I can. Like, obviously I'm going to do different fantasy books like steampunk. I'm going to do the Chef Medieval one with Ayer Mooncalf. I'm going to do like a sci-fi one at some point. But this one's different, you know, because I want it to have everything that I could possibly think of. Like a lot of nature inspiration, a lot of fae magic. I want creatures. I want old history and dead people and cool places like Modeg and Ventus. And, you know, it's just, you know, it's just a unique thing. And so I just wanted it to be a real world. It felt real. It felt like it's lived in. And like I wanted to depict relationships very well, like with his friends Simon, Wilhelm, and Minette, Fella, Mola. I wanted to include a conflict like with Ambrose and Hugo, kind of like getting up in his face and his business all the time. And just, I wanted the university to have magic. I wanted Ori to feel weird and kind of interesting and enchanting. I wanted like Stanchion and Dioch and Count Threpe and the Mayor and Lady Lackless and all these people to feel Tempe and Martin and Dedden, Hespe. All these people to feel just unique in their own personalities. And so it's been very hard to write this. Like I've had to write it for a little bit to take a break. Had to write it, take a break, come and go, because it is just so long and there's so much I have to write that it is overwhelming. Because I did not expect this book to take off the way it's taking off, to get the cult following it is. And it's great, but it's flattering, but it's a lot, because I now have these people that are so invested in this that I'm like, you know, the writer's responsibility is you have to tell it. You know, fantasy changed the narrative of storytelling, because books before that used to be so straight, narrow road that once fantasy hit the shelf, once historical fiction, once horror, you know, like Edgar Allan Poe stuff, it changed the narrative of literature. And, you know, we don't have to follow all these crazy single-line, bone-backy-breaking plot lines all the time. You can tell a story in your own way. You can tell it however you want. And so it's hard because I want to make sure it's good. And so that's why I'm taking my time with it. I don't care if this book doesn't release for another 4 years. I just want it to be perfect, because at the end of the day, it's my book. It's mine. And I want it to be perfect. I want it to leave a lasting memory in people's heads. And like my girlfriend loves it. Like she hasn't truly directly stated it's her favorite one, but she has said that it is one of her favorites that I've written so far. And so, you know, there are books that I'm going to write in the future that I am excited to write and I want to write, but I have to focus on Bloodless because it's such a big project that I just want it to be, you know, I want it to breathe. So yeah.